In the heart of New York's Finger Lakes and triangulated by Rochester, Syracuse, and Ithaca, Seneca County rises from the Seneca River and Montezuma Marsh at the north to the highlands of Lodi and Covert in the south, overlooking the largest of those lakes, Seneca and Cayuga. The county has a proud heritage reaching from settlement in large part by Revolutionary War veterans to its most recent recognition of the founding of the American Women's Movement. There are many factors that have shaped the county's history and growth. Its development of a strong industrial base along the Seneca River, whose rapids provided the power, its story of transportation, with development of the river as a Cayuga-Seneca branch of the Erie Canal joining it to the world. Agriculture, its largest industry, the county's role at the Peter Whitmer Farm, and the beginnings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon faith, and the 1848 First Women's Rights Convention. One of those factors goes far in establishing the essence of the county as a seat of strong and ongoing patriotism and deep appreciation for those who fought, in many cases lost their lives, in the cause of freedom and democracy. Its legacy is the founding place of what we now know as Memorial Day and its unfailing solemn observance. In 1866, 1 year after the end of the Civil War, Waterloo druggist Henry Carter Wells and County Clerk John Boyce Murray, the latter having risen through the conflict to general's rank, agreed that there should be a solemn remembrance of the community's citizens who had died serving the Northern cause in the war between the states. From their concept, there would be a day set aside to honor those who did not come back from the conflict. Women of the community stripped their gardens of early spring flowers, gathered evergreen boughs, and met at a downtown building to create floral crosses and wreaths. And on May 5th, with cross and wreath and martial music, the people of Waterloo marched to the 3 village cemeteries, where religious and patriotic ceremonies were held and the graves were decorated. Thus began Decoration Day, that special time we now know as Memorial Day.
Quoting from Waterloo's Memorial Day Centennial booklet, The History and Origin of Memorial Day in Waterloo, New York. On May 5th of the following year, these ceremonies were repeated. In 1868, Waterloo joined with other communities in holding their observance on May 30th, in accordance with General Logan's orders. But history had been made 2 years previously, when on a day in early spring, Waterloo gave Memorial Day to the nation. Other communities have claimed Memorial Day's founding and may have decorated graves in 1866 or held ceremonies in other manner at about the same time. But none other has continued the practice as has Waterloo until this day.
In 1966, when the village determined to conduct a fitting Centennial observance, both New York State Governor Nelson Rockefeller and President Lyndon B. Johnson recognized its legitimate claim from exhaustive documentation. The governor lauded Waterloo, noting its first formal and complete, well-planned, village-wide observance dedicated to honoring the war dead, and called upon the citizens of the state to participate. The president put a stamp of approval on a congressional act accepting the Waterloo claim, a claim shepherded through to Johnson's desk by Amsterdam, New York Congressman Samuel Stratton, and entrusted it to Stratton, who as guest speaker of the day here on May 30th, 1966, delivered it on the spot.
Over 2 years ago, the citizens of Waterloo began to realize that 125th anniversary was coming up. As we got together and talked, we decided that we had to do a big reawakening on the 125th. Usually people do things on the 50th anniversary. They do it on the 50th, the 100th, the 150th. We decided we couldn't wait that long because in between we would lose a generation or two. We needed to heighten the awareness of the meanings of Memorial Day. We also realized that we still have living veterans of 4 wars with us. And it's important on Memorial Day to remember not only those who died, but also all the rest of them that served. And we can do that this Memorial Day.
More than a year of planning, begun by a sizable committee and with work by hundreds of volunteers, led to a month of remembrance, ceremony, and yes, celebration, as Waterloo was site of a huge culminating gathering for its solemn rites. It hosted a first-day Memorial Day stamp cancellation, was the site of band and choral concerts, a host of money-raising events to help fund the activities, a Civil War encampment, a reenactment of the original Decoration Day, a tour of homes, a lawn social, a Civil War-era ladies' tea, a veteran and Boy Scout guarded replica of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, a Knickerbocker baseball game, guided tours for the heightened visitation at its Memorial Day Museum, a flag run walk, an outdoor Memorial Day Mass, and a national commemoration of the 125th anniversary of Memorial Day. While that degree of activity can hardly be expected to be sustained year after year, when the community joins the veterans organizations each May 30th for solemn ceremonies and decoration of veterans' graves, the participation seems to grow, one case in point being the presence of ever larger contingents of World War II Navy veterans who trained at nearby Sampson Naval Training Center, more than 60 this year alone. As they were on May 5, 1866, American flags are much in evidence on homes and poles along the parade route and throughout the community, and indeed, there are some who believe this year's efforts to expand flag display might qualify the village for recognition in the Guinness Book of World Records. In memory of 134 years of faithfully honoring its war dead, Waterloo stands tall on its tradition as it marches forward towards a 150th anniversary, ensuring its place in history and with no thought of ever forsaking its heritage.
People's emotions don't change. The basic things of humanity do not change. They're always the same. It's in a little different scenario, a little different frame, but they're still the same. So basically, we should remember, as I've said before, that these people have given this last ultimate measure of devotion, their very lives. There is no greater gift a person can give. I can't stress that too strongly. There's no greater gift a person can give, but that he lays down his life for his country. And we must never forget this, because when we forget this, we'll be like the Romans, and we will fail. We've got to remember.
Civil War. The last war fought by Americans on home soil.
I think of all the wars that we have been involved in as Americans, the Civil War was the biggest catastrophe. Americans against Americans, the high emotions of defending their states, defending the Union, and pitting Americans against Americans can have nothing but catastrophic results.
More soldiers died in this war than any other because every soldier was an American. It lasted 4 years. It was fought in 14 states.
It was an odd war, even though they fought so brutally against each other. When the sun went down, they'd swap tobacco for bread, and they would swap stories and talk to each other through picket lines, drink out of the same canteen, and the next day they'd be back savagely beating each other again.
When it was over, 622,511 American soldiers never came home. Slowly, America began to recover. 1 year after the final battle, Henry C. Wells, a druggist in the small town of Waterloo, New York, population 4,200, attended a social gathering, mostly just friends. He remarked to others at the party that while it was good to praise the soldiers who came home, we should also honor the soldiers who gave their lives to keep their nation whole. Their ultimate sacrifice should not be forgotten. Time should be set aside for remembrance and their graves visited.
In the spring of 1866, General John B. Murray, who had only a few months before been elected as Seneca County clerk and had moved to Waterloo, became enthused with Mr. Wells's idea. He was a man of some prominence. He was a trained and polished orator. He had commanded the 148th Regiment of the New York State Volunteers, and he marshaled the veteran support and decided that a Memorial Day would be held early in May. The date was May the 5th, 1866. The village had prepared for it in advance. The village was well decorated with flags, bunting. One record we have indicates that one of the storekeepers here in town was even asked to order additional flags for the occasion. On May the 5th, the ladies and children of the village gathered at Towsley Hall, which was sort of a public hall here in Waterloo, and with the help of other citizens, men and boys, they prepared wreaths and crosses and bouquets for each veteran's graves. The veterans, having been pulled together by General Murray, and of course this was in advance, well in advance of the formation of the Grand Army of the Republic, these veterans banded together, formed a band, and with clergy leading the parade, proceeded to the 3 existing village cemeteries. At that time, the graves of each one of their fallen comrades were decorated, and the first Memorial Day observance was complete. The excitement of the day, the excitement of the plans, caused heat exhaustion among several of the participants, including Henry Wells. He never fully recovered from the effects of that day, but did live long enough to observe the first national observance of Memorial Day, which was held on May the 30th, 1868, under direction of the Grand Army of the Republic. He died later that year, never receiving any great amount of credit for his part in establishing Memorial Day. After 1868, after Henry Wells's death, the recognition as the founder of Memorial Day more or less fell upon General Murray, and he was in great demand throughout the state at patriotic rallies as well as Memorial Day observances. This recognition continued until his death in 1884.
Time went on, and America became involved in foreign affairs, which meant foreign wars. The Spanish-American War, World War I, the war to end all wars. World War II, the war after that. The Korean conflict. Vietnam. By 1965, the responsibility for the Memorial Day observance had fallen to the VFW and the American Legion. They took turns organizing the day. In 1965, the observance fell under the auspices of the American Legion. They had asked New York Senator Samuel Stratton to speak at the observance. That day, May 30th, 1965, another local resident of Waterloo, John C. Becker, mentioned to Senator Stratton that the Library and Historical Board thought something should be done to mark the centennial of Memorial Day in 1966.
That Memorial Day should be observed in a fashion showing great respect and fond remembrance and a recollection that so many thousands of people over 215 years have given their lives to make the country the way we find it today.
In his speech later that day, Senator Stratton made a public announcement and commitment to a commemorative observance.
I have never known a federal legislator that ever was as devoted as Sam Stratton. He was a personal friend of mine. He did everything he could for me and the committee. He smoothed out the hills and leveled the valleys, and without his help, Waterloo today would not be recognized as the birthplace of Memorial Day. He wheedled and wrangled and used all his political clout to gain support and got us not only the House concurrent resolution, but he also got us President Lyndon Baines Johnson's signature on our proclamation as from the federal level.
It would be a special event, for once again, America's youth were fighting overseas. By May 30th, 1966, the United States had been actively involved in Vietnam for almost 2 years. And once again, the people of Waterloo would not forget those who died. In early June of 1965, James McCann, commander of the Waterloo chapter of the VFW, and Oliver McFall, commander of the American Legion in Waterloo, met with the local government of Waterloo, including Mayor Marion DeSica, and various trustees.
The original meeting was held at Dick Schreck's house, and representatives of veterans groups, civic and fraternal groups were invited to attend. Out of that first meeting, or the first 2 meetings, came a 9-man steering committee, which was later enlarged to 10 men.
The 10-man committee was formed, and on July 7th, 1965, they held their first meeting. John C. Becker, Marion DeSica, Richard T. Schreck, James McCann, Bruce Bishop, Oliver McFall, Marshall Somerville, John S. Janung, Leland Henry, and Robert Close met every other week for the next several months, planning the day and researching the claim that Waterloo is, in fact, the birthplace of Memorial Day. Commander McCann became the chairman of the committee. He appointed Richard Schreck as chair and John Janung as vice chairman of the research committee. Also serving on this committee were Gordon Rook, Joan Brzee, Stanley Reynolds, Crystal Fegley, Mrs. Gordon Rook, and Ruth Sweet. It took several months of hard work, but proof was eventually found establishing Waterloo as Memorial Day's birthplace.
There were 3 legislators that were crucial in their assistance to enable us to establish the fact that Waterloo was the birthplace of Memorial Day and gain state recognition and national recognition. On the state level, Joseph Finley, who was our assemblyman, and Senator Ted Day moved heaven and earth to establish communications between the governor's office and us. And we had a very tough time in proving our case to a certain individual in the state education department. But once we had him, his name was Bill Terrell, and he grilled us terribly. But we finally gained his support, and through that we gained the governor's support, and we received our gubernatorial proclamation.
On March 1st, 1966, it became official. According to the state of New York, Waterloo is the birthplace of the Memorial Day observance. In planning for a 100-year ceremony, the Centennial Committee decided to adopt an official emblem, an outward sign which, by its appearance, would embody the spirit of Memorial Day. The logo was designed by Roger Meadway, Jr., art director at Waterloo Central School. 2 plaques identifying the homes of Henry Wells and John Murray were unveiled. Relatives were on hand. A century-old home on East Main Street was purchased to house the important documents and artifacts pertinent to Memorial Day. The museum opened its doors on May 30th, 1966, and was run by Mrs. Crystal Fegley until 1974, when Ruth Semptner assumed the duties of director of the Memorial Day Museum.
We're proud of the Memorial Day Museum we have here. We hope it is a place where visitors can come from all over the country and obtain a little education and be inspired, recognizing from their experience here the fond remembrance and of all the people who have given their lives. And we hope that by coming here, they go away inspired in a very patriotic sense and can take a message back to their own hometowns.
Meanwhile, other committees were involved in organizing activities to commemorate this very special 100th anniversary. The entire village would be involved, just as they had been 100 years before. In contrast to the first Memorial Day, May 30th, 1966 was cold and blustery. Coats were the order of the day. Just as prayer had been an important part of the original observance, so it was in 1966. The day's program began with a religious observance at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The Right Reverend Edward Randolph Wells, Bishop of West Missouri, presided. He was the closest living relative of Henry C. Wells. At Lafayette Park, so named because of a visit by the Marquis de Lafayette, ceremonies were held by various military organizations. Legion Commander Oliver McFall and VFW Commander James McCann placed a wreath at the town's monument in memoriam of the soldiers who have died in combat. The Union Army of the Commemoration, a group of volunteers from all parts of the country who had reformed military units of the Civil War, fired a rifle salute, and the American flag was raised. A concert was also given in the park by the Waterloo Senior High School Band under the direction of Ronald Cox. At 2 p.m., the parade began. The schoolchildren of Waterloo lined the parade route, each waving a flag. The color guard presented their colors, and bands played military music. Many veterans groups marched, as well as soldiers from the Seneca Army Depot and from both the Union and Confederate armies of the Commemoration. Commander McCann had been the steering committeeman in charge of organizing the parade, but much of the work fell to the co-chairmen John Jarvis and Fred Schultz and their committee members Robert Scanlon, James Lewis, and Commander Oliver McFall. At that time, 2 residents remained who had fought in the Spanish-American War, Guy Teller and Everett Decker. They were named honorary parade marshals. Grand Parade Marshal was Brigadier General S.B. Wurtenberger, and Parade Marshal was Donald Merriam. The parade route traveled down East Main Street to Virginia Street. It then turned down West Wright Avenue and then north onto Center Street to the high school, where further ceremonies were held. Greetings were given by Senator Stratton.
This is certainly a magnificent occasion today, and I'm delighted to be a part of it and delighted to be here. The only thing that I can think of is that I just wish that Mr. Wells and General Murray had decided to create Memorial Day in the middle of July.
He then presented Waterloo Mayor Marion DeSica a proclamation from the President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Present to you this resolution by the President of the United States, but also the pen which he used in signing it in the White House, and also to present to you a formal engrossed copy of the resolution passed by Congress, and I'll read that too, if I may. The 89th Congress of the United States of America at the second session. Concurrent resolution resolved by the House of Representatives, the Senate concurring, that the Congress of the United States, in recognition of the patriotic tradition set in motion 100 years ago in the village of Waterloo, New York, does hereby officially recognize Waterloo, New York as the birthplace of Memorial Day, and authorizes and requests the President to issue, prior to May the 30th, 1966, an appropriate proclamation calling the attention of all citizens to the centennial anniversary of the first observance of Memorial Day in Waterloo, New York. Attest by Ralph R. Roberts, Clerk of the House of Representatives, and by Emil J. Frazier, Secretary of the Senate. And I'm pleased to present this to you for turning over to the Waterloo Memorial Day Library for safekeeping there.
I want to thank you, Congressman Stratton, for everything you've done, and I will see to it that it will be placed in the Waterloo home on Main Street.
Major Colin P. Williams then read a proclamation from Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller.
On the 7th of March, 1966, the following proclamation was issued. On May 5, 1866, the citizens of Waterloo, with stores closed, flags flying at half-mast, draped in mourning, with wreath and cross and martial music, marched to the village cemeteries to eulogize the fallen heroes of the Civil War and lay formal offerings on their graves. This was the first formal, complete, well-planned, village-wide observance of a day entirely dedicated to honoring the war dead. The observance was held 2 years before General John A. Logan issued his famous Order Number 11, formally proclaiming Memorial Day, then called Decoration Day. These facts are corroborated by documents from authentic sources. The people of Waterloo are justly proud of this outstanding event in the history of their community. They are planning a solemn and colorful celebration of the 100th anniversary of the first Memorial Day observance held in their village. It is fitting that the rest of us, their fellow citizens of the Empire State, participate in this celebration. So therefore, I, Nelson A. Rockefeller, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim Waterloo, New York, as the birthplace of Memorial Day. To be so honored throughout the state of New York. Given under my hand and privy seal of the state at the Capitol in the city of Albany this 7th day of March in the year of our Lord 1966, signed Nelson A. Rockefeller, and properly authenticated.
A moment of silence was then held in honor of those who had died in service to their country. A wreath was placed by two school children, Jeffrey Hoffman and Susan Tarr. and the Gold Star mothers held a special place of honor. And the Waterloo High School Choir sang under the direction of Ronald Cox. Waterloo has continued to hold ceremonies every year to commemorate this most solemn of holidays.
Memorial Day to me hadn't meant much until I had gone to Europe and served in the infantry in the European theater of operation during World War II. After that, Memorial Day became something different to me. It wasn't just another holiday, it was a special day. Until I had been in combat and seen my friends cut down and deprived of their life, it left me with sort of a feeling of maybe guilt that I should survive and they didn't. So Memorial Day to me is sort of a means of easing that guilt a little bit by paying homage to those that were less fortunate than I.
It really never grabbed me until I became a veteran of the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam. And when I came home and I go to the Memorial Day services and I hear taps, and I think, Max and Steve, that they're playing that for you, and my other buddies that are that didn't make it back. And that really brings what Memorial Day is home.
I think people should set aside a time to give commemoration to those that have been lost in war as frontline troops, as support troops, as whatever they might be. But I don't think it's a day that should be spent entirely at the cemetery or entirely in a church. These people fought too hard for the freedoms of our country, so it should be a day that is enjoyed by everyone, because this is what they gave their lives for.
It goes back a little bit because I was born and brought up here in Waterloo, and I know the village very, very well. But I always used to look forward to Memorial Day in Waterloo. I can remember it being quite a festive day, and of course, being a young kid, I had a bicycle, and I used to decorate the bicycle completely all up. All kinds of paper, you know, red and white and blue all around the wheels and all that. And the parade would start usually around 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be downtown there, and we'd be riding around and get into the parade with the bicycle, you know. But of course, that was a kid's point of view. Memorial Day is certainly a very important day for us all to remember, because we have to pray and honor and remember what they meant to us when they went to battle and the loss of their lives for the preservation of our freedom here in this country.
The plans for the 1991 commemoration include the issuance of a new first-class stamp that will bear this design. Also, a replica of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier will be constructed and will be guarded by Waterloo veterans and soldiers from the Seneca Army Depot. A parade will be held and speeches will be given not only by local and state dignitaries, but by President Bush himself, if world affairs permit. But it will be a bittersweet commemoration this year, for once again American lives have been lost in a foreign conflict. Once again, our men and women have made the supreme sacrifice so that we and others may lead lives of freedom and peace. We hold their memories as dear as we hold the memories of the ones who have gone before them. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up your quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
It was an ordinary day, except that you wore your school clothes instead of work or play clothes. Mother always had a bouquet of flowers to take up to the rooms. The ladies made them into bouquets, and usually scouts and the ones who were working there would put them on the graves. Somebody always say the Gettysburg Address from high school. My mother would say, well, they're going over the back bridges now, and that meant that they were going across the canal to get to the one in the cemetery at the canal, or at River Street.
Bear Cemetery.
Yeah, the Bear Cemetery. And then they marched back, and that was, you was invited up to the rooms, which were right there on the corner where Pete's Plaza is now. I can't remember whether it was the first floor or the second floor that they gave us coffee and beans.
Coffee and beans.
Coffee and beans, yeah. Well, I didn't get any coffee because I was only a little kid. I didn't want any coffee. We didn't drink coffee. Well, yes, you can see it's taken down on the end of the Semptner block. And there's my grandfather and grandmother and my Aunt Louise Clem from Rochester with her two boys. And Mr. and Mrs. Aird, who run a kind of a clothing store, and I forget what else. And then there's Mary McHugh, and her mother is upstairs in the front room there with looking out the window. And then the Jim Gibson's grocery store. Well, sometimes St. Mary's school kids would march in it. There were a lot of Civil War veterans left. They were all, I don't know where they put the ones that couldn't walk or get around, though. And of course, I remember my uncle coming from East Bloomfield to be a marshal down here one time at their parade. He was a Spanish-American War veteran. His name was Van Buren, Llewellyn Van Buren. Well, Mr. Cadmus was always in it too. Mr. Cadmus was a cabinet maker, lived over the river, over the skies, and he was always in it. And Jacob Sands, he was always in the parade.
How do you feel about living in Henry Wells's house?
Well, I feel proud of it, and I try to keep it nice looking.
As a resident of the village of Waterloo for 50-plus years and the present mayor, there are very few Memorial Days that I have missed. And Memorial Day is an observance here in Waterloo. We always observe the Memorial Day, which is May 30th, no matter what day it falls on. The people in this village and the surrounding area do not believe in just having a party. So we here, it's a very calm, sort of solemn day. We visit the graves of the people that have gone before us so that we can observe this day.
My name is Jim Lewis. I'm a Korean War veteran. In 1952, when I came back from the Korean War, I got involved with the annual Memorial Day services here in the village of Waterloo. The American Legion and the Waterloo VFW were in charge of it. You just can't put this big parade together overnight. The 100th year and the 125th year, it took us just about one full year to do it and do it proper. Yeah, and the weather was gorgeous. It wouldn't dare rain here in the village of Waterloo on Memorial Day.
Welcome to the Memorial Day Museum in Waterloo, New York. These are the Chamberlains who built the house in 1830 and lived here for approximately 20 years. This is General Murray's parlor chair, and this is the wine decanter that's set on his mantle. The story is told that he was at a party and a bullet whizzed by his ear and hit that wine decanter, and his host gave them the wine decanter, and it sat on his mantle until his death. This is the Reverend Samuel Gridley, who spoke at the first Memorial Day observance in 1866. The plan for the first Memorial Day was developed by Henry C. Wells, a local druggist, and John B. Murray, the Seneca County clerk. Waterloo won the honor of being called the birthplace of Memorial Day due to the historic-minded citizens, the GAR members, because locally they commemorated Memorial Day every year from 1866 until today. This cabinet was provided by volunteers from odd scraps that we had in the museum. After this turned out so nice, I asked the VFW if they would provide other cabinets for us, and they provided other cabinets in the room for some of the other uniforms that we had. The one thing that we really need is a Civil War uniform or a reproduction of one. And of course, we would love to have a cabinet to go with it.
Easy, ma chérie, rum-da. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Now when I awakened, we were sad and even, so I flew to Mephisto's, but alas, I was mistaken, for I...
Stand tall, stand proud, voices that care are crying out loud. And when you close your eyes at night, feel in your heart how our love burns bright. Stand tall, stand proud, voices that care are crying out loud. And when you close your eyes at night, feel in your heart how our love burns bright. Stand tall, stand proud, voices that care are crying out loud. And when you close your eyes at night, feel in your heart how our love burns bright. Feel in your heart how our love burns bright.
We would like to ask those of you in our audience tonight who are veterans or members of the armed forces to please honor us by standing and accepting this token of our appreciation. Please stand.
Did you ever know that you're my hero? And everything I like to be.
I've spent the past month talking to our kids, the youth of Waterloo. We talked about life in 1866. We talked about Henry Wells and John B. Murray and the Memorial Day story. We talked about patriotism and pride for our town and our country. We talked about showing respect for our flag. And yes, we talked about stamps and stamp ceremonies and cachets and cancellations. And now, kids, I told you I'd have a message for you today. So please listen carefully. Now you know the facts. You know the story about our town. Now you must not forget it. These feelings must not be put away this evening and forgotten until next year on May 30th. Every time you see our stamp, every time you see those 3 flags flying in the breeze, it should make you proud of your country and your hometown. It should remind you of all those daddies and big brothers who went to war. You should remember those who returned, and you should remember those who did not come home, who died helping to make our country what it is today. And kids, it's your job to grow up and to carry on those values and traditions that are our heritage. You must learn it well so that someday you can teach your children, through your actions and words, the Memorial Day story. Thank you.
It's a privilege that I never dreamed of or received 15 years ago when I left Waterloo High School. I want to tell you, folks, that all of us who served down the Gulf felt very proud to communicate your will to Saddam Hussein in the language that he understood.
I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Mrs. Jane Shaffer, who is the president of the Waterloo Business and Professional Association here in the village of Waterloo.
And I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Mr. David Duprey, who happens to be the deputy mayor of the village of Waterloo.
Thank you, Jane. I guess when we thought about what to do for the year 2000, it wasn't anything new or inventive to decide to commemorate Memorial Day. I think across the nation, everyone wants to do something special for the year 2000, but this is only a natural extension for us since we've been commemorating this day for over 134 years.
Memorial Day is very important to the village of Waterloo and to our country as well. And for that, we thought that we needed to have a celebration and a commemoration for Memorial Day. And to that end, we are going to have a 5-day celebration commemoration event, which is going to be involving the entire village with all of their youth activities and all the civic organizations as well.
Right, I think that we realize that this event can be celebrated and commemorated so that we can remember those who died for us, but also those who lived. The Village of Waterloo, along with the Veterans Associations and the Waterloo Business Professional Association, are planning the event that will take place in the year 2000. We've been working at it now for about a year and things are really coming together. Jane will now tell you a little bit more about the details.
We will begin our 5-day event on Friday, May 26th, with opening ceremonies in Lafayette Park. And those will be performed by the different civic organizations as well as veterans groups. We'll continue in through Saturday and Sunday with antique car shows, arts and crafts shows, and also a Civil War concert. We also will be having the 148th New York Volunteers hosting a Civil War history encampment, which will begin on Friday and conclude on Monday, the 29th. Also on Monday the 29th, which is the day the National Memorial Day is celebrated, the community will be striving for a world record for the most American flags flown in a community. And all of our youth organizations and scouting groups are involved in this. And they will be canvassing the communities to make sure that there are flags prominently displayed throughout. It certainly will be a sight to be seen and a patriotic honor to the village of Waterloo, also known as the birthplace Memorial Day. And then on Tuesday, which is the authentic Memorial Day, on May 30th, the veterans groups will be having their parade and their activities in the park and at the cemeteries. And we hope that you can all join us for this historical event, because Waterloo truly is the birthplace Memorial Day.